My name is Jelani Cobb. I'm a staff writer at The New Yorker and a professor at Columbia University. I first met Ras Baraka more than 30 years ago. Born the son of poets Amiri and Amiri Baraka, he grew up in a household where struggle was a creed.
The 1980s was an incredible time to be at Howard University. I was outside of the administration building and began to see police getting into helicopters. At that moment, our protests got very real. The dichotomy of my world made me feel like I needed to write poetry, to get it down, so I wasn't feeling like I was crazy. I used to hide my poetry in my back pocket and just try to fit in with everybody else. Tried to be as normal as everyone else was, even though what was happening in my household wasn't normal to them. When I write, I get into a space where I begin to see the world not as somebody trying to change it or fix it, but as somebody actually in it. I'm from Newark for real, for the good and for the bad. You know, my oldest brother went to jail, my youngest brother was shot in the head, my sister was taken from me by violence here in my community. So I chose to write, and the words came easy to me in my grief. And when I shared my poetry, I realized that it had a deep impact on people. Nina Simone stayed in our house for a little while. Lauryn Hill was friends with Sister Soldier, and one day we met at Sylvia's restaurant in Harlem. I worked as an educator for over 20 years before I became the mayor. I started in 1994 running for office. I ran for mayor at 24 years old. I lost. And I lost every election after that for like 16 years. The fact that I'm the first mayor of Newark in about a half a century, who was born and raised here, that tells you something. People like me historically have been locked out of power. People saw me as radical, and I get it. When you're holding a megaphone and occupying a building, you're gonna look a little radical to some folks, but I never really saw myself that way. I've learned that love is the most important thing to maintain in revolution. Kids have dreams. Their dreams are like everyone else's dreams. First, when you're a baby, you want to be Superman. Then you dream you want to have a big house and travel, take care of yourself and your family and have money. You don't want to be poor. We have to imagine something different, to have a radical imagination, to think about a place that's different than the one you've been forced to be in.
Talk to me about what your emotional relationship to the city is, or you can describe it.
Newark is like a close-knit, I call it a country city, you know what I mean? It's so small but big at the same time, and people know each other's families, and I mean, it's just close-knit in that way, and that we took care of each other. And you know, it's like in your house, you fight with each other, but when somebody try to do something to your family, everybody bands together. And that's always been the history of this town. It's like we've been the underdog. People talk about Newark as mostly negative, and when that happens, people become insular, right? They begin to depend on one another. And I think that's been Newark's case for a very long time, that we were here on our own, and we had to make it on our own. The fact that I'm the first mayor of Newark in about a half a century, who was born and raised here, that tells you something. People like me historically have been locked out of power here in our own home city, and I hope that's changing, and I hope I'm the one that's changing it.
The Book of Baraka, only on Audible.
Hello, my name is Deirdre Cross, and I'm the Assistant Director for Public Programs of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And it's my pleasure to welcome you here this evening for a wonderful discussion of the Book of Baraka by the Honorable Ras Baraka, Mayor of the City of Newark, and his co-author, Jelani Cobb, Professor of Journalism, Columbia School of Journalism School, and staff writer at New Yorker magazine. The book is a recent release by Audible, an Amazon company. Joining Mayor Baraka this evening is Lonnie G. Bunch, 14th Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution and another esteemed son of Newark. Please join me in a warm welcome for Mayor Baraka and Secretary Bunch.
Good evening. How are you, Mayor Baraka? How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good, good. I want to begin by just congratulating you. I have looked at a lot of audiobooks, listened to them, and this is a tremendous achievement. It is spectacular in terms of understanding your life, but also the sort of marriage of word and oral histories and music, just spectacular. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I had a great time doing it.
Well, let me begin. You and I are both two guys born in Newark, both went to Howard. Um, you went back, I stayed away. You probably made the smarter choice. But I wonder, as you think about Newark, the city we both love, what is it that's special about Newark? What is it that could have brought you back and continues to inspire you?
Well, I always knew I was going to come back to Newark. I think it had a lot to do with my family and what we left behind, and me feeling obligated to make sure that I left an imprint, an impact on the city I was born and raised in. My friends were taking a different trajectory than I was. I wanted to make sure that more folks were on the bus to college and not on the bus to being incarcerated. There was a lot of things that reminded me that I needed to go back home and do what I'm doing now. I don't know. I didn't know how I was going to do it at that time, but I was definitely insistent on getting it done.
I was struck. There's something you say in your audiobook that you say that you didn't make it there despite growing up of Newark. You made it because you grew up in Newark.
Right.
So what is it about Newark that, gave you that foundation that you could grow on and turn you into who you are today?
Well, Newark is a rough and gritty place. I mean, you know, you have the best of you have the best of family and support and extended family here in the city. It's almost like being in the South but up north. We have that kind of thing going on in the city, but also just the difficulty of being from Newark, the perseverance, the insistence on making it against all odds. When people count you out and count you down, and they talk bad about the city and the people in it constantly and forever since I was a child. And I don't know, but anybody but great people that have once they've gotten through this thing have become great, incredible people in a larger world and have left their mark on the world coming from Newark.
There is something powerful though about the grittiness of Newark. I mean, they always say if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. I feel if you can make it in Newark, you can make it anywhere. And I tell people all the time that what Newark does is Newark gives you a steely edge. It inspires you to work hard, but it also gives you that edge that allows you to fight your way through. And I think that's really key when I think about your own career and your own life.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think anything that I've gotten this far, I didn't have to struggle for it, but I didn't think that anything was going to come without a struggle. And I guess that's what it does. It makes you believe that everything you're going to get, you have to pay for it. So at the end of the day, I was prepared for that.
So, talk to me about your family and what is it about your family that helped shape you? I mean, one of the things that I'm struck by is you talk about your mom, you talk about your father, two poets, two creative people, but you also mentioned Nina Simone and the fact that you were enlisted to do work with Lauryn Hill. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the role your family played in shaping you and specifically the role of arts and culture and literature in shaping who you became.
Absolutely. I think that just in a fundamental way, there was something happening in my household, in my home, that just wasn't happening in the larger world out in Newark, in school, or in any of these places. At one point, we were sheltered from it in some instance, and then launched into it, right? And you can see the differences of what was happening in my household and what was happening in the community, in the city. And as a kid, you look at that, you feel a little strange and off put by that. But when you get older, you start growing, you begin to analyze that and you see what was happening. Really, what was happening was you were being informed, right? you were given a different set of lenses to look at the world and look at yourself in that world at the same time. And you could juxtapose those things and come up with your own conclusions about what better serves you. And I think that helped me tremendously. And my family was very community oriented, always involved in issues and fighting, and their ideas changed almost every decade or so. And that affected the family and what we did and where we traveled and what we believed in. And that's also impacted me. And I think one of the things that impacted me the most is just books everywhere in the household, books everywhere. Just gave you a love for reading and studying and help you understand that if you're going to do anything, you have to know what you're doing. You have to read and study and be clear on it. And I think that prepared me a great deal to be able to engage almost anybody out here, because I made sure that I was well read in many things, particularly our history and our folks. And then art and music and culture and poetry and all of that was deeply embedded in all of that. And I said earlier that on another interview that my view of poetry was different than what we were getting in school. I mean, listening to Sonia Sanchez or Linton Kwesi Johnson doing dub poetry, or Miguel Pinero, or New Yorker poets Miguel Alvarin, or my father, it's completely different than the poetry we were learning in school. Back then, we didn't even have Dudley Randall's book, Black Poets, right? So we were just reading, the basic poetry they give you, the so-called classics in school. And it was completely and totally different than what I was being kind of trained as through experience. And it impacted me, just the sounds, the music, the liveliness, all of that, the outward kind of talk of like rebellion and diatribes, people getting up, giving speeches. I mean, it has to have an impact. It sits in your memory, it kind of infects your DNA. And when you go out into the world, you take a lot of that stuff with you.
So talk to me a little more about that. I mean, I can imagine the debates in your house. I can imagine the people coming through, sharing their creativity. How did your parents sort of make sure that you weren't overwhelmed by it, but that you were immersed in it in a way that it would shape who you were?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, my father never sat us down and said, listen, you have to read this, you have to do this, you have to do that. Short of African preschool when we was like little children, but or my mother wanting us to watch something on TV like Eyes on the Prize or a Malcolm X documentary, saying, look at this. But you were almost like immersed in it, as you say, like it's happening all around you. I mean, there's a jazz and poetry series going on in the basement of the house. There are all kinds of colorful people coming in the house. You had Max Roach playing drums in the basement, and people blasting horns, and you sitting on the steps at a house, people eating cornbread and black-eyed peas and collard greens and singing and dancing until the wee hours of the morning, and people getting up reading poetry. And later you find out these people were like important or somebody. And it always, like when I became an adult, people used to, people talk about my father in different stages of his life. And they embrace one stage or criticize one stage, but never talk about him as a whole person, right? And I never really understood that until I got older as in out of college, older and really engaged. And I understand how that serves people. But I met so many people in the house. So there were so many people. There were people from Europe and Mexico and Puerto Rico and Africa and Jamaica, and all these people were in there. So doing their thing. It was a serious jam session all of the time, man. And
what a reservoir to dip into. I mean, when did you realize who your father was as a poet in terms of his impact nationally?
Well, when we were kids, we would go around with him. He would take us sometimes. I remember just going up to Stony Brook and then Long Rod and hanging out in his office up there, or going to plays down in the village when he was doing plays and hanging out while he was doing plays, or going to his poetry readings. And you knew something was happening, that these people were clapping and praising and doing all this. So you knew something was happening. Not clear what, but something was happening. When you get to school, when I got older and got to school, people have different point of views and opinions, and they treat you a specific way based on the way they view your parents or view your father, and you begin to understand that not everybody agreed with him, not everybody thought it was right, and you also get affected by that as well. I mean, there's also a backlash that you get from being immersed in that kind of stuff, and so you begin to understand that something different was happening. I mean, as a kid, you clear that something different is going on. When I got older, you get a better analysis and understanding of what actually is happening.
Do you know, my earliest memory as a 12-year-old during the Newark rebellions was the picture in the Newark Evening News of your father bloodied and bandaged. Um, and my dad, who never cursed, actually just flipped out and said, they're trying to kill our lives, our culture, and everything we believe in. So, talk to me a little bit about the rebellion. You weren't born, but
Right.
yet some people would argue that Newark is still shaped by the effects of that moment. Um,
Sure.
and so, I'm curious. What do you think? Is are we still grappling with the rebellion? How has it changed Newark, and how does that shape your time as mayor?
I would say so. It's like a historical trauma that's passed down, and we have never really dealt with it, right? There's never been any real discussion between state agencies, local agencies, what happened as a result of that, the social and economic impact it had on families. There's been no repair, no real discussion. So it lingers in people's memories and their hearts, and they relive it every time it happens. I mean, there are people who've lost their lives. There's never have been any real redress of any of that, and so I think that's what carries it on, past 1967, even into the present tense. And we just really basically crawled our way out of that economic hole. All of the buildings burnt, the disinvestment, the deliberate and intentional disinvestment in the city, and people walking away. We really just are beginning to see the results of work that have been done over decades to recover from that. I mean, I would argue in the last 3 or 4 years. So, it definitely it still has an impact on us in all ways. And I think that ultimately somebody is going to have to really deal with it in order for us to understand what really took place in the city. Definitely.
Well, I think about Newark has had a series of renaissance, right, under Ken Gibson, under Shark James. And so I was so impressed with the Newark that I see under your tenure. What is it that allows you to see this rebirth of Newark? And why are you optimistic that this will be one that keeps rather than like the other ones fade?
Yeah, and I just think just the stubborn, kind of obstinate deliberateness that we've been involved in here, trying to make sure that this thing continues itself. And we have been really building off of things that people have set before us. So we didn't come in on this, oh, we got to start from scratch, because that's not true. We didn't have to. And, because as you said, it was foundation laid already. It was easier for us to springboard off of that if we connect what we were doing to what has already been done. And we tried to do that. I mean, absolutely. Finishing projects that didn't finish, rebuilding stuff that was thrown away. Whether you're talking about the NJ Pack Towers or Kawaida Towers, right? We building off of legacies that were established way before we were born, even, and as legacies that were established as we were children. And we just trying to really push those past the goal line. I would say to score touchdowns, and I think that that those things are going to hold, because we're trying to make sure that there's policy and legislation that makes it systemic and endemic to the city, despite who's the mayor. And we're trying to grab the people of our community and get them engaged and involved in it, because that's the only way that I think it sustains itself, is if the people here kind of make sure that it lives on, even beyond themselves.
So it's really the issue of the sense of ownership, right? I mean,
That's
so
it.
many people ran away from Newark. And when people came back, they came back to for their own benefit, but to really say, how does what we do help the whole city of Newark? And I think that's one of the strengths that you brought to this.
Absolutely. Just the collective spirit, the collaboration, that listen, our dream is so big that we all of us have to carry it. It's too heavy for one person. Like we all have to put it on our back and carry it. And if we don't do that, it'll fall. And I think the idea that we bring all sectors of our community together to do that helps it not only to catch and work, but also to hold.
Well, you use a phrase a lot in the audiobook about basically radical imagination, a phrase you use. And so I wonder if you could sort of talk a little bit about what does that mean? What does that mean to you? And how do we imbue radical imagination in other people?
Yeah, I heard Dr. Cornel West use that phrase once, and it stuck with me in a different way. Like, because it became so apparent. It was like the light went off in my head. Like, this is really what it is. And I think the way you keep people subjugated is you take away their imagination. They can't even imagine a place other than where they are. And I think what the Great Migration and what the great book Warm Mother Sons kind of outlines is the fact that people imagined something completely different than where they were. They were out to go get it. Millions of people said, I'm out of here, right? There's got to be something better than this place. And you have to have a kind of radical imagination. If you don't, then you will forever be subjected to the present tense, whatever that may be, and in your present location, wherever that is. And then most of the times it might not be a good place. And to me, it means just imagine a place that's different than what you see here. And an opportunity to be able to get there. Like, how do we build what we want to create? A lot of times we know clearly what we're against, and we yell and scream about what we don't want, but we really have to imagine what we do want, right? And what we want to build and see, and get on a journey to make those things actually happen.
I think that's so powerful because embedded in that is it's both radical imagination, but it's also having people believe that something's possible. My grandparents moved to Newark in 1910, and they moved in part because they thought, one, it wasn't North Carolina, but two, what they really believed is that they thought they could imagine a world where they would be freer and fairer.
That's right.
And I think that really is at the heart of radical imagination, getting people to buy in and come together as a community. And I wonder, when I think about your book, one of the things that strikes me, it made me smile a lot, was your time at Howard. HBCUs are really so important. They've fallen in and out of favor, and now there's a great deal of interest in HBCUs. Talk to me a little bit about your time at Howard. How important was that? How meaningful was that for you? So here's the real question. Did you live in Slow Hall?
No. I lived in Drew.
I was a slow dog.
Yeah. I lived in Drew and then Meridian.
Uptown.
Howard, kind of shaped me completely. Like, well, I found myself there. I was struggling with a lot of, ideas and concepts and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I went there as an undecided major. I found history and political science, and right there on the campus, activism. My poetry became live there. Before it was personal and very private. It woke up and became very loud and alive at Howard. It introduced me to dozens of other people. Howard University made me feel like the things that I felt were legitimate, like the things that were in my heart and in my stomach were real and were needed, in fact. And so it helped me nurture that. And I had professors there with brilliant folks who were doing work in the real world, but also academics at the same time. And they pushed us to an extent where, they didn't accept what we gave them and pushed us to do more. I remember a professor I got a C on a paper. It was a 15-page paper I had to do on Liberia. And he gave it back to me and said, it's a C. I was like, well, that's good for me. He was like, no, you can't turn this in. Like you have to give me something else. That's the kind of, environment and pressure you were kind of under, even if you weren't in class, you were just around a bunch of brilliant people who were having a great time and growing up as kids, but also had incredible things on their mind.
The expectations of Howard is really important, right? It's the expectations, what they put on you, you put on yourself. But I'm curious, your activism took even a stronger edge during your time in Howard. Was that a response to the conservatism of the Bush administration? I mean, I'm just curious, what was it that was going on outside the campus that sharpened your activism?
Yeah, and I think timing is always important. As we were developing, as I was developing at Howard, joining organizations, began to read books, how Europe underdeveloped Africa, capitalism and slavery. All these books became more Ivan Van Sertima. All this stuff was before us in lectures, and so you're reading this stuff. It's like you were in a martial arts class. You're learning all of these skills and understanding, and then in the world outside of you, all kinds of things is happening. So now you have an opportunity to test and challenge these ideas, like whether it was apartheid and the struggle against the apartheid in South Africa and all of that movement, or the conservatism, as you say, of Ronald Reagan that turned into Bush and Lee Atwater and all of that stuff at the same time, the cutting of social programs, the suffering you saw back home and the things that people were dealing with, just really inspired you to say there's a lot for you to do. You got to get yourself out here and get it and engage yourself and get it done. And I thought people were very apathetic at Howard. Actually, I thought there was even in their activism, I thought folks were not doing enough. And so we started our own organization to kind of expedite that, to make it happen, to start something, to get people really to do more.
Because you're right. Because one of the challenges of Howard is a lot of folks were, middle class, upper middle class, and so to be able to take advantage of Howard, to take advantage of the faculty, the learning, but also take advantage of the sense of activism is something that's really shaped your life. But I guess the question I want to ask you is, when you think about activism, often we think about it as outside the system. What
Right.
is it that made you think, you know what, I want to bring that sense of the outsider into the system? What was it that made you think that politics was going to be part of the way you lived your life and part of the way you cemented your commitment to activism?
Well, I think as soon as I, got back home and started engaging, in education and teaching in the body politic period, you begin to understand. Every time we protested, we wound up in front of City Hall. We marched in front of City Hall. We had, meetings in front of City Hall. We went to the council meetings, yelling and screaming about things. And I said, we keep coming down here. There's obviously something inside of this building that we need to get our hands on, right? And
That's right.
it almost was a dare. Like we need to go ahead and see if we can transform what was happening. And as my ideology began to change and ideas began to change, and I listening to my father always talk about the struggle for democracy and self-determination, that it was a two-ness of it. It was, you can't have one without the other. I began to understand that our fight for democracy also means our fight for inclusion, our ability to get what other Americans have at the rate that we need it at. In fact, simply because we're here. Even if we came here by act of history, we're here now. And so we deserve what everybody else is getting. And our struggle for democracy is our way to get that. The fight for the right to vote, for equal education, for all of those things that we're fighting around in politics is our struggle for democracy, to expand it.
In some ways, one of the powerful notions of the activism that came out of your time at Howard and your family is the sense that this activism really helps the African American community, but it helps the entire community. This notion of democracy and fairness is really at the heart of this. And I think one of the most powerful things about African American culture is that whenever you see a moment in America that there's been the expansion of liberty or the expansion of the notions of citizenship, it's tied to this history, it's tied to this culture, it's tied to this community. And so, do you continue? I'm curious, as a poet, do you continue to sort of balance the political side with the creative side, or is it all one to you?
Well, it's really one. It's only because it's difficult for me to divide it. The things I talk about have to do with all of this stuff. And like I said in the audiobook, writing poetry, I feel like I'm in the world. I'm not really trying to change it or affect it. I'm one of those people that are out here and trying to struggle to make things better for themselves, for their family, for the world, and identifying those things with a political edge to it at the same time, because I can't deny who I am and what I've been engaged in, and so it's all married in some way.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever? I'm curious, as a poet, a gifted poet, did you ever worry that you were going to be compared with your father as a poet? Did that inspire you, worry you?
Well, I mean, no, I knew I could never. I mean, in poetry, I mean, he just was so profound.
Yeah.
I never even attempted to compare myself to that. I just didn't think that I can hold anything there. But I wrote poetry because I didn't have no choice. It was coming out, and I started putting it on paper. And it kept coming. And then my father, before he passed away, told me not to lose your poetry license, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I interpret that to mean so many things, but ultimately keep writing, right? And that was the encouragement enough that I needed, that at least my poetry was a little good.
But I think that notion of keep writing, of persevering, is all part of the struggle to change a city, to change a society. And I'm curious, you persevered to be mayor. You didn't win on your first time around. What gave you the ability to keep fighting that fight, to believe that you would one day be mayor? And then when you finally became mayor, um, what was the first thing that hit you in terms of what you wanted to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, I think each time we ran, we got a little closer. The first time, we had like 3,000 votes. The last time I lost in councilman at large before I won, we lost by like 60, 70 votes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we were getting a little closer, and more people were figuring out who we were and what we were doing. And, so it makes the kind of old adage true, keep trying, and the more you lose, the closer you are to winning. And that was a reality for me. And that day was really heavy, for me, to win that election was very heavy. I just lost my father a few months before that. Um, you know, uh, you so used to the votes coming out, and you're waiting for a runoff or the bad news to hit you and so forth and so on, but it never came. It never came, and it was surreal. And we went down the city hall steps. I was standing there with all of those people, just saying, "Wow, tomorrow I'm gonna have to figure this thing out." You have to really put your money where your mouth is now, right? It's one thing to say you want something; is another whole emotional place to actually have to build it and do it yourself. Um, so immediately there were so many things that were in my mind about what it is that we needed to do, and part of it was just begin to allow the apparatus of government to be used, and the levers of government to be used by the people who actually live here, like to give them an opportunity, right or wrong, or indifferent, the opportunity to engage in it.
So when you think about being mayor of the great city of Newark, and you think about all the challenges that you have to face, what gives you hope?
Well, the hope actually comes from these kids, man. I, I, I got book clubs. We was just doing, like I mentioned earlier, the Wrongful Mother Sons with these children, man. They're so brilliant, and they're so clear. I was never that brilliant and clear in high school at 15, 16 years old. These kids are clear. They understand what's going on, where they at, what's happening in their city, the good, the bad. And it gives me hope that even in the midst of all of this craziness, that we're going to be okay, right? That is going to be okay. Because if we have these kids this resilient, this confident, and this clear in the middle of all this craziness, then not only have we done a little bit of the stuff right, but it's proof that when things get a little better, we really gonna be out of sight.
Yeah, exactly. About, I'd say 4 or 5 months ago, I went back to Jersey and I caught the 13 Broad in Belleville and went down Newark. And I was struck by how much the city has changed in many ways in terms of, what used to be S. Klein's on the square and, the impact of Rutgers Newark. But I was also struck by the challenge of what hasn't changed. And so when you look and you say to yourself, this is what gives me hope, what worries you?
Well, what worries me is that, people will get lost in the changes, that people aren't clear in terms of what this really means for them, or they abdicate themselves from the responsibility of making sure it's for them, or pushing it even further. This idea that this is for somebody else and not me, and that we get mired down in this old historical trauma that keeps us locked into one place. That we really have to break that and seize the things that we need and use it for our own growth and development. And sometimes it worries me how powerful our forces of foes are to keep us in the situations that we're in, and how long it takes for us cycles for us to push that rock up the hill, as my father would say, to push that rock up the hill.
So it's a combination of both believing that this is making a difference, looking for those victories that show it's making a difference, but also remember that you've got to find the right tension between patience and the lack of patience. And I think that's one of the things that's really, really important as I watch your tenure.
Right.
I wonder if you would share with us some of your poetry. I think it's just really so powerful. It'd be wonderful to hear some of your poetry.
Okay. Our children are paralyzed in fear, frozen in their own footsteps, looking deeply at themselves through the eyes of white supremacy. Poverty colored into their dreams, waiting desperately to be rescued by other older versions of self-defeat and circling their second chances. Wait, I have to put my glasses on. I'm old. Here we go. Waiting desperately to be rescued by older versions of self-defeat, circling their second chances, hoping to God that their grandmother's prayers work and the long line of inevitability somehow passes their doorstep, and that fairy tales are real and happy endings are more than seeing tomorrow's sunrises out of corners of dimly lit streets. We a long way from breakdancing and burners, clenched fists and breakfast programs, from graffiti and dirty mattresses, no more football in the street or tops boards. We've overcome some time ago, suffocating each other's dreams for whatever's left of whatever was left, falling against the walls of right now, lost in the moment of that blue juice and painkillers, our songs foreign to us. The dialect we don't understand got us pointing our weapons in the wrong direction, exploding generations of memories into one giant commercial. You hear that noise? You hear that noise? The thumping sound, a thumping sound, a thumping sound, a drum with no bottom. Us arguing on talk shows why it ain't okay for everyone to say nigga. You hear that sound, that noise, a thumping sound, that noise, that sound, an awful beating, a drum with no bottom, not the word, the content, no feeling, no movement, no heat or fire or smoke, no life, no words, no feeling, no understanding, just beating and bopping heads, and not even bopping, because bopping is B and B is bopping, and bebop is something hip, just going side to side, then up and down, a drum with no bottom, like being woke but sleep, like being woke but sleep, yeah, a woke sleep or a sleepwalker, where they direct even your dreams and turn them into TV drama, breastfeeding your babies, the violence of greed and the pain of growing up in the promised land with no promised land, and the taste lingers in their mouth, so they grow up older, betting their or betting their lives on material things, pitch and toss, wishing on kings, but dying like common folk, that most often ends with their brains all over our sidewalks. It's that noise, those bottomless drums got them mummified, stuck in the sick reruns of bad stories on corporate news shows where mouths move but no sounds come out, begging for them to allow you to protest your own mockery to save your life in exchange for the flag. Irony is, would be no stripes without you, no red or blue, paid the first life, the sweat on your brow, the coat of scars on your back from cotton to sweet cane, ships and warmonger, separated from your mama, your kids, the woman you love, the God above, changed his name, painted him as a fascist and cursed you biblically. Yet every land you invaded and every conflict you fought, making the world safe for a democracy that if you saw, you wouldn't even recognize up close. Chase racists from Germany, only to have them foxholed in the Oval Office, disguising populism as stretched necks from poplar trees, and you can't even raise your fist at a football game. Hell, you can't even raise your fist at a football game. They steal the screams from your starving children. It's that noise, the thumping, the unsound, and almost shuffling, the enemy going to and fro, trying to devour the last bit of dignity you have, and you pleading the patience of Job, but praying that God let you have one of those thunderbolts so you can blast your way out of here, go find your drum, your talking drum, speaking in tongues, a million different languages all at the same time, a deep feeling, a moving, a funky revival, some Holy Ghost and exorcism. Hey you, hey you, hey you hear those beats, those beats, those beats? Damn.
Tam is right. Spectacular. Spectacular. You know, my problem is that I consider just sit with you and hear you read your poetry all day.
Thank you, brother.
And I know I know everybody's all excited about it. You want to read another one, or you want me to go into questions?
It's up to you, man. You know,
give me another one. You got another one?
Let me find. Okay, I'll do this one. In the same kind of vein, we've been running from demons ever since we got here. Followed us across the Atlantic, crawled out the ocean deep across human bones, been running from demons ever since we got here. Begging for forgiveness for our brother's sins, sold us to the ghosts, been killing each other ever since, looking for redemption and raindrops, wash away our sorrow, our footprints to freedom so they can't find us wandering around lost in the promised land. Finally figured out we didn't get here all by ourselves. We were pushed here, made from whirlwinds and backwoods prayers, stringed instruments and deep steady hums, ring shouts and hollers. We is the Holy Ghost, made to grow against the concrete and sand, our complexion causing the earth to turn red, a dark mud fashioned in the deep breaths and colorful skies. We became music, the actual notes, the melodies in our movement. God made us with herself in mind. We be superheroes, heroines in all black. We swallowed the world's pain, embraced bitterness and turned it into art, passed it out as medicine, and they've been addicted ever since. But you trying to understand, bet you trying to understand how we got here this way, so vulnerable and exposed, our tears like raindrops all over the ground, watering hope, a revival, God's sad song, a long, consistent refrain. Truth be told, they all gathered here looking for the promise, and we was the promise. We a miracle, an outright miracle. That fire next time, the food Daniel ate, birthed in the furnace in the mouths of whales. We wailed, we lived anyway, stripped of our skin. We a miracle. We be's a miracle, alive, unadulterated miracle. Our back scarred with the history of denial and hatred. We proof of it all. Our children's laughter, our Sunday praise, our chanting is by design. We smile to ward off evil. Our happiness is calculated. We exist as evidence of something greater. In our dance, hell, we dance just because we want to. We were here when light exploded into the sun and crashed into the complete darkness. And if you completely still, you can see us, hear us dancing on the horizon of time. When breath was formed between hilltops and ocean floors, we made ourselves into ourselves and smiled and said it was good. But still trying to figure out how we got here, and what it was like before we came. I'm trying to imagine what the world would be like when our babies discover themselves in the palms of their own hands, when they hear their own whispers pushing to give birth, when they figure out the color line and that the trap is just that, a colorful way of hiding between the lines of our enemy's sick imagination, so we won't be crushed by the heavy burden of the truth like water on our faces, our mama's voice when the street lights came on, or when we outside playing in our good clothes, when they feel the heat of summer suns on the concrete of poverty and look straight in the eye of fire that's been burning for decades, see their names scribbled all over the wall in every language imaginable, a growing hum in the middle of their mind, pleading for themselves to live on purpose with purpose, to see their own success in their brother's eyes, to be against death and dying, to love each other in resistance and build families out of defiance, no matter how crazy things seem to be, to decide to be together anyway. That's all we ever really needed. The thing they've been missing all this time, when they discover that they have relatives all over the planet in every corner, deep in the crevices of every idea, creation of our material conditions, that original sin that gave birth to fallen angels. When we discover our music is prayer, and if suffering is redemptive, we've been redeemed a long time ago.
Let me simply quote what I learned at Clinton Memorial Church in Newark. Preach on, brother. Preach on. Really spectacular. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I appreciate it.
We've got some questions from the audience that I'd like to share with you. And one is something that I think is really powerful, and that is, what was the greatest lesson that you received from your parents?
Wow. Oh, man. One, I think, from my father, I learned how important it was to study and evolve, that our history is motion and motion makes history. Like, you're going to change and develop. And I learned that from my father. And, my mother, just a deep, undying love for people. My mother really was the one who pushed my father into other ideology and other thinking, her love for people all over the world. She used to say I had more in common with Irish farmers than I did with African kings. So that stuck with me for a long, long time.
So another question is, what do you see yourself many years from now after you finish as mayor? Do you see yourself teaching back again, political science, creative writing? And how does your administration help to support that kind of cultural creativity in our schools today?
So just the last verse, we have book clubs right now. I mean, yesterday, I believe, I just did a book club with Arts High on the warmth of other suns. We just talked about the reading and writing, and we compared that to a tapestry that we looked at, in Newark by an artist from Howard University as well. We are definitely pushing that in our curriculum, whether it's poetry or novels or fiction or nonfiction. We definitely are pushing writing. But when I leave here, because one day I will, I want to write. Obviously, continue to write, continue to read, speak. So part of that is also teaching in one capacity or another. But to continue to do that and prepare other people to take this another step further and do things that I couldn't get done.
There are people you've mentioned like Isabel Wilkerson and others. And one of the joys of where we are in this world now is there's so much wonderful creativity, and a lot of it comes out of places like Newark. And so I'm really pleased to hear you are really stimulating the next generation to revel in what I think is really important. That is the power of the word,
That's right.
and to make that word your own. So I just wanted to applaud you to that. So everybody always asks this question, and so I will ask it again. And that is, you're such a great mayor. Do you plan to run for higher office? Is that in the cards for you?
Well, I mean, honestly, right now, I'm in the middle of election now, trying to become the mayor again. So I'm really focused on that. I have the motto, and I tell everybody, you can't play a game you're not in. So I'm in this game right now, and I'm focused on making this happen. And if I make a decision to do that, then I will. And I guess it'll hit me just like being a mayor hit me, like this is something that should happen. And if it does, I will. If not, I had a great opportunity to do the dream job, to be the mayor of the city I was born and raised in. And if I had to stop tomorrow, I'm completely satisfied with the work that we have tried to do. And I want to continue to write and read and teach.
Will you always live in Newark?
Yes, I will always have an opportunity to, even if I go somewhere else, I'm going to have an opportunity, a place to come back and spend time in the city that gave me everything that I have.
I tell people all the time, you can leave Newark, but Newark never leaves you.
That's right.
And I think that's really so powerful about the city. I wonder. So one of the questions we've received is someone said Mayor Baraka seems to be a hip hop mayor, regularly appearing on the Breakfast Club radio show, working with Lauryn Hill. Has that helped you build connections with students and younger generations? How has that shaped the way you interact with the younger part of your constituency?
I think honestly, I think just being an educator has really done that for me. I've taught generations of children and their parents and their uncles and brothers, and that has really connected me more to community than anything that I've ever engaged myself in. Um, and that does, but understanding the music and understanding hip hop and all of that gives you this kind of nuance to understand what's going on in people's minds and what's happening in the community, and gives you the language to talk to kids and other audiences about what you want them to understand and how you need them to move forward. And we have an office of youth and college affairs in City Hall, right? That's run by young people. And you know, that me understanding that is what made us create that office, right? Understanding that we have to engage these young people, even if they're not speaking the same language we're speaking. We have to figure out a way to get them involved in what we're doing.
And you've also, I think, created some interesting partnerships with the high schools, but also with, you know, Rutgers Newark,
Oh yeah.
um, and, you know, Essex County Community College. So I'm just curious, do you, as you look at the educational landscape of Newark, are all those part of what you're wrestling with to make sure that the next generation gets the education they need?
Absolutely, man. I grew up in Newark. They say when I was a kid, it was like Newark is a college town, but I didn't feel that way, right? As a kid, right? And so we're changing that, right? So the whole University Avenue, the whole Halsey Street, we're bringing the kids out of those universities into the streets of Newark and creating pipelines so more of our kids can go to the schools. We have a mayor honors program at NJIT where we putting students at NJIT with scholarships, and they're interning at City Hall at the same time. You know, there's more than a dozen kids that or so that went through that. The Rutgers Honors Program built a whole dormitory dedicated to pulling in Newark students, putting them in the liberal arts program at Rutgers University. I mean, all of the universities in Newark are working collectively and collaboratively to figure out how we put more of our students in those spaces and how to build more in the city and make sure there's a bridge between the university and the actual city. I want to see Newark students with Rutgers t-shirts on, you know? Yeah.
I mean, what you've said though is so important because when I was growing up, those schools dealt with people outside of Newark. What they were in, but they weren't of Newark. And I think one of the things that has changed is that commitment, and a lot of this is through your tenure, to basically be of Newark, not just in Newark.
Absolutely. And we've had some great leadership over there. Like Nancy Chancellor Cantor is, and yeah, she hit the ground running right away and embraced everything that we were trying to do and took it to the next level even. Whether it's hiring Newark residents, making sure they're working on the campus, making sure the kids are going to school there, all of those things, and making goals and reaching those goals, forcing the other universities to do the same. NJIT, Joel Bloom setting goals and making sure that they meet those goals, that Newark students are there on those campuses, right? And it's great because I actually know some students that went through there, right? That some of them were my kids even when I was a principal. Went through there, that went through these programs that are successful now. So just to see that is just amazing because I knew absolutely no one when I was in high school that went to any of these schools.
I agree. Um, so, last question for me, and that is, um, as you now, you know, been in this office for a while, what surprised you about being mayor, and what has changed you since you become mayor?
I think a lot has changed since since I've become mayor. I think I've been more kind of introspective of what we've been trying to do in myself, and then just really uh, become more pragmatic about how we get these things done and accomplished. I've become very, very serious about not just talking or thinking that things should change, but how do we develop the skill to actually change it, like to paint the painting that we want to see. And that right there has given me a little bit more patience in terms of the process, but also, if it's possible, a greater sense of urgency at the same time. Because you can see how desperate these things need to be done, but you really have to be calculated in getting them done.
Well, let me just simply say one, even though the clock is ticking, it's such an honor to spend time with you. I think your work as mayor, your work as a poet, your work as a citizen of Newark has really been transformative. And I want to thank you for what you've done. I want to thank the National Museum of African American History and Culture for organizing this event. I love the National Museum of African American History and Culture, so it's always great to let me come back and be part of it. And I want to formally thank you, Mr. Mayor, for not only taking your time tonight, but for all the work you've done. And really the work that's explored in this terrific auto book.
Thank you.
It took me down memory lane. If I had more time, I'd talk about walking on Jelliff Avenue and going to Broaden Market and trying to sneak into Penn Station, but those are conversations we'll have without being recorded. But I wanted to thank you so much for the work you've done to help improve a city that I love and a city that was once a model and will be a model again of what urban life can be. So thank you so much. And
Thank you, Doc.
let me turn the back to Deirdre Cross and let her sort of take us out. Deirdre?
Thank you, Secretary Bunch. And thank you, Mayor Baraka, for an absolutely wonderful conversation about your memoir and your extraordinary life. And thank you to our audiences for joining us this evening. We wish you all a very safe and well evening.